I'm Alan Robarge, a relationship coach and a psychotherapist, and I like to talk about attachment injuries and healing attachment trauma to improve our relationships and learn better skills of relating. And this video is titled, Maybe You're the Narcissist. And obviously that's a bit of a provocative title, and I want to play with the words here to say, maybe you're the narcissist, maybe we're the narcissist, maybe I'm the narcissist, and let's just take the word maybe out of it. Let's talk about our narcissism collectively. And in order to do this, I need to create some disclaimers because this is complex information. There's a lot of misunderstanding and assumptions. And there are a lot of people who come to listening to this information with an agenda of what they think I'm going to talk about. And then also to acknowledge a boundary around this content that I have had for 3 years. I set out on day one to create videos 3 years ago and to explore content around attachment injuries and healing attachment trauma, and understanding insecure attachment and all of the symptoms and the behaviors that come out of that, and create some core beliefs about our sense of self and how we can very much identifiably in a predictable way see patterns of relating. And we know that some of it's coming out of attachment trauma and some of it's coming out of a bigger sense of insecure attachment. And included in that then has to do with a process of development around our sense of narcissism. And I very clearly did not want to be linked or identified with the anti-narcissist online communities or that content, and very much saw what I was doing as needing to have to think a bit beyond focusing on other. And that's one of the greatest problems and challenges, is when we begin to try to understand someone else's pathology. For a group of people, for most of us who come into this information, we are struggling to stay focused on ourselves and learn about ourselves. And so therefore, when we find messages that explain how other people are messed up, or other people are the source of our suffering, or other people are treating us poorly and actually they're abusive, that obviously that's a really refreshing message if we need to understand those dynamics and understand abuse dynamics, but it still reinforces that we're going to go down the rabbit hole of referencing our own experience of ourselves through what has happened to us or through the lens of abuse. So part of the disclaimer here, and I have to say this really clearly, is I am not talking about abuse. I'm not talking about narcissistic abuse as it is commonly known in a bit of a casual way on the internet and online, and the way so many untrained, misguided people want to talk about it. There is a goodness to untrained, misguided people wanting to talk about it. The goodness is saying, let's continue to educate ourselves and clarify what exactly is going on. And so it makes sense that we're doing things in stages and chapters, and I by no means have mastered this. This is really, really complex stuff. And also simultaneously, I'm also working with my own development of self, my own maturing, my own insecure attachment, my own attachment trauma, and how do I create relationships and learn better skills of relating. So simultaneously, for me to even make a video about this, it's really challenging because the content is complex, but also I'm simultaneously learning and growing for myself. So the disclaimer, the boundary, the clarity here is I'm not jumping on the bandwagon and talking about abuse, emotional abuse, manipulation, and focusing on these other people who are the bad, evil narcissists. We are not going to talk about, the 10 ways to disarm a narcissist, the 5 ways that narcissists try to get under your skin or manipulative, the 12 ways that narcissists are toxic and belittle your worth. It's a particular approach to trying to come at some understanding and hopefully clarify where we need to create some boundaries. but by design, it inherently has no boundaries because it's still talking about them, 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 them. And this video is, I want to talk about us. I want to talk about you. And I'll simultaneously be folding myself into this too because I understand this process. The narcissistic wound, which is different from narcissistic abuse, which is different from trying to pathologically diagnose someone with a personality disorder. That's not what I'm talking about. But it's important to make the distinction that I want to go in the direction of talking about a narcissistic wound, the wound of the development of the self, because it's that very wound that all of us experience, all of us suffer, two sides of the same coin, whether or not you're going to single someone out and say they're the perpetrator narcissist, or whether or not you're going to identify yourself as being on the receiving end as a codependent person, or if you don't like that label, as someone who has been victimized. This is all challenging stuff to talk about and to use these words because I'm trying to establish this boundary of these two different areas of focus. But even if I reference them, I have to validate and honor and acknowledge that all of this is true and real. So if I'm trying to say, hey, wait a minute, this group of content and this group of people and these online communities that are trying to really stoke the fire or hit the drumbeat around narcissistic abuse, I value that that's an important area of study and exploration, and I acknowledge that it's real. There are mean people, there are bad people, there are evil people, there are people who are coming from narcissistic tendencies. The actual number of people who are narcissists is, from a pathological diagnosable standpoint, is a rather small percentage. And based upon how people are anyone who, many people, not anyone, but many people who feel cheated and wronged and misunderstood and hurt and in some kind of dynamic of a power struggle where their needs were completely dismissed and their sense of self was dismissed, it's very easy then to conclude, well, that other person is a narcissist. So we're not moving into the area of diagnosis. We're not moving into trying to track if people are or aren't narcissists. We're going to look at your narcissistic wound. We're going to look at how we all have a narcissistic wound, whether or not we call ourselves narcissists, whether or not we call ourselves empaths, whether or not we call ourselves codependents. And I don't like this language. I don't think it's helpful. And that's the point of this video, and that's the point of why I've had a boundary of not talking about this. I've created an online presence, a community, and I have a membership community of a 8-week program. And very clearly, after 3 years of videos and a lot of content that I've created around articles and conversation prompts and asking questions and interacting with people, that it's very important to maintain this boundary that the type of work that I'm doing is not needing to move or let me rephrase this. The type of work that I value around healing attachment injuries primarily needs to come back to focusing on your sense of self. And for some people, let's talk about chapters of healing. We all are in different stages. We're all in different places. It is very possible that the message that I'm sharing here is not the right time. It's very possible that you're someone who already knows what I'm talking about. You've already moved through this chapter, and this is really not, something that you're focusing on anymore. We have to realize that we're all coming to this at different levels, and we need different things. And so it can be very, very helpful if you need to go through a phase, a stage, if you need to go through this chapter of healing, where it is important to really focus on the narcissist and abuse dynamics, and really understand how you have been manipulated, you have participated or been privy to toxic environments that belittle your worth and your sense of self and disconnect you from even knowing how to make choices so that you can move forward and get yourself out of that situation. And this of course links to all kinds of abuse. This is all about domestic violence and any kind of situation where abuse dynamics and power over dynamics and misuse of power are really seriously hurting people. So my message here, the disclaimer, I mean, we haven't even jumped in. I'm still just talking about this disclaimers. And I'm doing this for reasons I'll explain in a bit. There's a lot of aggression and anger in the communities that come together, communities plural, that come together to talk about narcissistic abuse. There's a lot of aggression, there's a lot of anger. And then and a group of people who are very easily defensive and very easily triggered and very easily want to oftentimes direct aggression towards anyone who is not beating the drum in the same way, or if in any way they disagree with what is being said. It's, I have witnessed this. I've had a small taste of it because I've made sure I had the boundary and didn't want to be a part of it. But I had a small taste of it personally. But I have witnessed it. I have been in Facebook groups. I have seen online forums, conversations that come up. And what's underneath all of this is an incredible amount of aggression and rage and anger, and that is fueling how the narcissistic abuse community is attempting to dissect or distill down to make sense of, in the spirit of healing, in the goodness of coming into clarity. But as part of the process, again, we talk about chapters, is that it actually still simultaneously can be a not so skilled place. I always love the phrase skilled and unskilled. And here we have some people who are very much traumatized and hurt and coming out of abuse scenarios and very sensitive, and sometimes express their discomfort and being triggered from a place of unskilled aggression. So I'm making this very, very clear that I'm not inviting any nasty messages or people coming, the internet is full of hate speech and hatred and being unkind. And if at some point, if this information is not helpful or triggering, please lead from a place of skillfulness and compassion and don't make me the object of the aggression. And I am going to continue to talk about how that is an underlying core theme of this misguided, unconscious rage, this primal rage that is folded into the narcissistic wound, and that is then playing out in part of the communities that want to talk about it. And so I've had a boundary. I do not want that energy leaking into the community of people who are doing healing work from the perspective of the guiding principle that I endorse is called self-directed healing, and really looking at healing as a lifestyle and saying, we need to take ownership for our own maturing, our own personal growth, and we are continuing to water the seeds of better health and water the seeds of better healthy relating. So in order to do that, it's really important to know how some of this residual toxicity and this unowned anger and rage can leak into when we start talking about healing attachment injuries and healing attachment trauma. And the conversation then very quickly can get sucked into or move into talking about narcissism. So last time, just to repeat here, the boundary is we are not talking about abuse dynamics. We are not talking about what is referred to as narcissistic abuse. We're talking about narcissism as a developmental process that gets thwarted. And in that developmental process that gets thwarted, we experience a wound to our sense of self. It is the wound of the development of the self. It is a wound around being nurtured to be you. That there were some obstacles, there were some limitations, either, identifiable, conscious, something going on in your family history, and potentially it could have happened, in other contexts. But for the most part, that you were not really able to be yourself. and that you were in an environment with some people who were distracted, meaning family and parents and primary caregivers and whoever is there. And many of them did the best that they could do and were distracted for legitimate reasons, their own mental health concerns, just trying to survive and work, and how challenging it is to raise a family. And also they themselves struggled with a not very strong sense of self. They themselves have a wound in their own development of self. And so it becomes very, very challenging for someone who doesn't have a more integrated, grounded, centered place of self, meaning if the parent doesn't have that, well, then you're just unable to provide that to the child and, offer the right type of presence and nurturing, and to encourage the child, to really encourage the child to come out to be seen, but simultaneously the parent is seeing the child. And so the wound of the development of the self is that you fundamentally were not seen for who you are. And usually then, this was in the context of some kind of dysfunction, or even also abuse in the home, or some other addiction and addictive environments, some mental illness, someone's really, really depressed, stressed out, chronic stress and anxiety around money and finances and poverty. And it just creates an environment where the parent is just totally distracted. And so yourself, you're not welcomed to be you. The parent just couldn't see it. And then in addition to not even being able to see it, that the environment in some way was potentially hostile to you coming out and being yourself, or the environment was so unattentive that you started to question subconsciously, your little child mind, well, there must be something wrong with me. I mean, these people don't even see me. These people don't engage me. And this can become really incredibly crazy-making and complex if you had parents who were good caregivers, and parents who are fundamentally loving, and parents who are fundamentally good people. And so in some ways you did receive a foundational nurturing around being loved, but in the everyday immediacy of sharing presence and engaging in emotional attunement and being there for each other, a kind of harmony and a resonance to know each other, to be known, to create invitation of vulnerability and intimacy, to really share, holding space with each other, and to share an experience that we both enjoy each other's company and we both see each other, we see who we are. And many of us did not have this. And this can create limitations and obstacles and challenge that have then gotten in the way of moving through our necessary development and maturing into growing into our adulthood. And so this wound exists around our immature self, and it's a wound where we're still seeing the world through the lens of this younger self. And we developed a number of core beliefs where there must be something wrong with me, there must be something wrong with you, because these people didn't even want to see you. I mean, these people didn't even want to engage with you. And so therefore we conclude or we feel, it's not only a belief, but we feel unlovable, we feel we must not deserve love, there must be something wrong with me. And all of these core beliefs link to a really provocative, horrible, nauseating, uncomfortable feeling that there's something fundamentally wrong with who I am, that I am flawed as a human being, and I'm talking about shame. So all of this whole dynamic, the wound of the development of the self, we experience a shame around the messaging, whether direct or indirect. The messaging we received is, don't be yourself. We don't want to see you. We don't know who you are. We are so fine not knowing you, and let's just smile, let's just move on, let's just enter the next year of school, let's celebrate holidays, let's continue to be a family. But all the while, we don't really want to know who you are. Everything's fine. Or maybe everything's not fine, but we still don't want to know who you are. So this creates this ongoing core messaging and belief system, and it belittles your sense of worth, or we call it the wound of the development of yourself, because you never had worth to begin with. So it's not only belittling your worth and your sense of self, it's like, well, we never nurtured enough or developed enough out beyond this through encouragement and through real presence and someone who wants to know our inner world and our experiences of who we are, and where we could reveal ourselves in vulnerability, that sort of, edgy place where it's simultaneously prickly but yet invigorating to open up. And many of us never opened up then. We just shut down this complete sense of, well, I'm not, I guess I can't even be me. And we shut down so much we don't even realize we are shut down. We don't even realize there's a skill to opening up. Or we shut down so much, and here we go. Here's a big part of this whole thing I'm talking about. The narcissistic wound creates a false self. And that's how we all then develop, saying, well, I can't be really myself. And when I've attempted to have my attachment needs met, and I've attempted to connect with my parents in a certain way, and I've attempted to want to share who I am and be vulnerable and open up emotionally, that's not working. These people are just checked out. These people are distracted. These people are self-absorbed. And remember that word, because it's the direction that we're going here. That's the sort of the link and the crossover with narcissism. That word, again, not narcissistic abuse, but this idea about narcissism is this, because our development of self was thwarted, we then need to enter a state of absorption to be able to make choices about, well, what do we do next? We don't really have a freedom or fluidity to know how to let the self just be itself, to let ourself just be ourself. We've manufactured a bit more of a false presentation, which subconsciously, unconsciously, we didn't try, we didn't sit down with a pad of paper and said, hey, let's create this. But, maybe some of us did. We did think like, I better, we coached ourselves. Do say this, don't say that. Do act like this, don't act like that. And for some of us, it was very conscious. I'm remembering in this moment, I can remember in 7th grade, I could see myself writing on a piece of paper, I created a persona. And I was looking at a JCPenney clothing catalog and picking out all the clothes I was gonna be I'm making up who I am. I'm gonna be this person. Now at that age, what I'm doing is normal. I mean, everybody does it. But it was simultaneously fueled with my life depended on doing it, because if I didn't do that, I really had no idea of who I was at all. Again, this is all normal. That's how this is, to go through the narcissistic development. And we can even say that it's even normal. Hear this, that it's really normal to have a narcissistic wound. And it's very easy to make the argument to say everyone has it, or at least in modern culture. And in modern culture, we're living in a very immature psychology. And for myself, identify, saying that to be a man, to really think of boy psychology. Our culture is steeped in boy psychology. We're not a mature masculine culture. And if we're also now talking about the feminine, we're a girl psychology. We're not the psychology of, the wizened woman. We are very immature, and so even collectively in a modern culture, we're really challenged to know how to move through this stage of development of the necessary self-absorption, of needing to manufacture a self in order to try to have it integrate and align with who we really are. The wound is that it never aligned, and the wound is that we never had a reference point for really knowing who we really were. And as a result, we kept reinforcing and believing, because the environment around us was unwelcome or maybe even hostile, is that we got the sense that we are going to be fundamentally rejected as a human being, and this is life or death stuff. So therefore the conclusion, the intelligent, the really, really intelligent conclusion is, I cannot be myself. I will be rejected and I will be, die here. And so therefore, how can I be a self who's false? How do I develop this other false self? So the wound of the development of the self is about an interruption to our maturing into our more adult knowing, our adult psychology. And we get stuck there. And some people have a different orientation to that wound. Some people really manufacture, unconscious, they don't try to do this, but they realize, you know what, my false self, my persona self is going to overcompensate. I'm going to be an overachiever, and I'm going to be a little grandiose, and I'm really going to be a lot of jazz hands and bells and whistles, and I'm too much for this world. And I'm going to make sure that you notice me. And so we have a presentation that's really sophisticated and dynamic, and we're even moving. Do you see the connection? We can see how then some people can very easily choose to be manipulative or manipulate environments to get what they want because they need to. Because that's what they needed to get their attachment needs met. Is say, hey, notice me. I know how to make you notice me. Now, there's also the other avenue, the other direction, is the person who implodes into themselves and they disappear so much where they want to stay under the radar. And, I've heard a number of stories of people growing up who would, had this ongoing relationship with hiding, literally. Hiding in parts of the room, hiding behind furniture, a particular closet where they would, sit next to the shoes and hang out with the long hanging coats so that when someone opened the door, they didn't even see that they were hiding in there. And that's literal, but also metaphorical or symbolic of, we just learn to say, just hold back and don't reveal who you are. All of this is folded into this narcissistic wound. And just to repeat, we're doing it in a context where the parent themselves are unaware of their own narcissistic wound. And the parent is unaware and or has given up on him or herself needing to mature beyond it. So if the parent can't acknowledge their own development of self, their own limitations and challenges, and how they would have to confront their own wounding, their own suffering, their own pain, and really move into this place of how painful it is to not have a secure sense of self, then they're not going to touch that content, touch that material, engage in it, or even know how, even know what the child needs, or what the child, as an adult, when the adult starts talking to the parent might not even know what you're talking about. Because the parent too, historically, never really was able to have an experience of nurturing and encouragement around just being themselves. Many of us come from histories and legacies, and even through history, this whole idea of, the world is not safe to be you, so you better figure out how to hide in such a way that keeps you distant. And you see that is the fundamental problem that we have in relationships, is that some of us, the moment we think there's a possibility to be in relationship with someone who is there, and we could practice falling in love and practice building a relationship, we are so incredibly hungry for this experience. We've been waiting so long. We just throw caution to the wind and totally latch onto this person and say, oh yes, let's just completely be, finally someone's here to see me. And then again, we have the other presentation, the other response of saying like, hey, I'm not going to trust this. You're going to not see me the same way everybody doesn't see me. And I'm just going to hang back and still continue to be guarded. So we're talking about attachment styles, preoccupied anxious attachment, attachment styles of avoidance. And linked to it, if we want to use this language, is we're talking about this narcissistic wound, the wound of the development of the self. And there's two sides of the same coin, which means it's two sides to this wound. The presentation could be, a bit beyond self-absorbed and manipulative and very out for oneself in a way that disregards others. Or the other side of the coin is to to diminish one's needs so much and to in a very hyper caretaking way want to monitor what everybody else needs, and that's what we generally see as the presentation of codependency. But what's the glue that's holding all of this together is that all of us have a narcissistic wound. So to single out this other group of people, to then elevate it to, when most of us talk about narcissistic abuse, we're not talking about narcissism and we're not talking about abuse. We're talking about the narcissistic wound. And that's why I've needed to create this boundary, because people don't make that distinction. And it's very, for reasons that I'll continue to explain, it's very easy to get hooked into exaggerating it's due to the other person's fault or the other person who is lacking, they have behaved inappropriately. They have behaved in a way that has been so hurtful to not give us what we need and what we want, which is some validation to be ourselves. But we pick people who they don't even know how to validate themselves. And you see, this is how it's a bit of a setup. We set ourselves up as much as we don't want to. But we set ourselves up, and even when we're coming from a place of being nice, and we're good people, and we know we're good people, we too are still leading from this false self. And everyone has a false self. That's, a bit of a common understanding of psychology, psychological, frameworks around the persona. In order to operate in this world, I need to create a persona. I have a work persona. I have a family persona. I have a when I'm a pedestrian on the street and I go to a coffee shop and I present myself. I have that persona, and for the most part they're all integrated, or they have a sense of fluidity, and they're not too wildly different. But we have this persona where we know in certain contexts we're going to accentuate and lead from certain aspects of our persona. And then when we're in other contexts, we're going to lead and exaggerate those. There is a genius to that design in our psyche, in that it really helps us, socialize. It helps us function, and it helps us adapt. But when we're moving into this as being problematic, and we might even say a bit in the pathological sense how this is, the limitation here is that when we over-identify with the persona, and the persona becomes a crutch, or the persona becomes all we know, and that now we're scrambling to protect our image and protect how we're perceived, and it's all about manufacturing ourselves because we are so far away, we are miles and miles away from even having access to a foundational truth of, well, who am I really? But we are so caught up in the presentation of the persona that this gets exaggerated as our false self. Now, at the core of all of this, and the reason why we are so attached to this false self persona, and our life depends on it, is that it is buffering us from our core subconscious shame that I already talked about. This shame, this sense that we concluded at some point in our little mind, a little person, usually, a lot of unconscious processes. It's just not safe to be me in this world, and I have a lot of, and I've received, some messaging. Not only is it not safe to be me, people don't want me to be me, and that is so painful and confusing. And the way that we experience it is a kind of shame. And it is that core shame that we then prop up our false self persona to say, well, I cannot experience the shame because it's too hurtful and painful, and I cannot show people the shame, and I certainly can't show people who I am, so I really need to invest in this false self persona because that's all I got. And so it serves a function and a purpose. It's like it creates a barrier or a boundary, or it's a kind of, it's the dam that holds in the river of shame. And then we say, well, I guess this is how I'm going to operate in the world. If we really in this moment, this is just, logical or just through intellectual, just what I'm going to say before we even tap into the feeling, but it just makes sense logically that anyone who has to endure this kind of dynamic, that very quickly you could see how this creates a profound anger. And I want to play with the language here to even turn up the volume. We're not just talking profound anger. We're talking primal rage. A rage that transcends our family and transcends our history and transcends the things that did or did not happen, transcends being hurt. It just taps into this extreme primal rage that's even nonverbal. For some of us, it happens so early on, it's pre-verbal. And it's this rage around, I am not welcome in this world to be myself. And as a human being, I'm in this environment that's telling me that I am flawed and there is something wrong with me. And I have to invest in this false self, fake persona in order to function, in order to be in a relationship, in order to get a job, in order to belong to community. And this is just deeply unsettling. This grows inside of us. This is a fire that is burning inside of us. And the type of primal rage that I'm referring to is so crushing and so powerful that it creates this sense of, well, these are impossible feelings. Because now it's not only tapping into our own individual self, our own individual life, our own individual story of how this got set up. We're tapping into a primal human nature for survival. And, the human experience is to go through some kind of transformative life, maturing, growth process, these rites of passage where we graduate into new stages of our development. And each time we are uncovering who we are and we're discovering who we are. Well, that process gets thwarted. That process gets hijacked by the narcissistic wound. And as a result of being hijacked and then stuck in a place of stagnation, of only being able to prop up your false self persona, this really sets up this impossible riddle of impossible feelings, this double bind where you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. It is a state of paralysis. It is shame paralysis. And the only way to maneuver through this, until we really are able in an environment that is supportive and that we have enough insight in quite honestly, where our psyche is able to be cracked open. Do you hear those words? How violent is that? That something in general, what I'm going to say is not totally true. How the heck do I know everybody's healing process? I have no idea. But for many of us, the only way that this whole thing falls apart is when there's a crack in the persona, and usually the explosion that makes the persona, the false self, blow apart is delivered through suffering. And for many of us, because our original wound is around attachment trauma and an attachment wound, it's going to happen in the same way. It's that, we're so in a fragile way holding it all together, And it's going to take the attempt to love and be loved and be in relationship and open yourself up to vulnerability and emotional connection. And when it doesn't work out, and you also have been involved in a toxic, dysfunctional dance of pushing each other away, then coming back together, and pushing each other away and coming back together. And it is tapping into a river of grief, a river of shame, that the relationship, the suffering, the ending, the profound grief, the crushing grief finally blows this all open. And for many of us, it is just so wildly painful, because we're left with all of these years of the aftermath of the profound ignoring that occurred in our history, the profound rejection, and that we just conclude, you know what? People, my family, even people who I know love me and I love them, just did not want to know me as a person, and even today still don't want to know me. And if I move into that place, there's a personal rage, but it links me to a deeper primal rage, which is also simultaneously laced and swirled with shame. And can you just hear the incredible sophistication that we all will need to discern in our mind and to make sense and to paddle through that river of grief? It is very hard and challenging. This is why I say healing work is a lifestyle, and this is why I say this is a full-time job, and this is why I say you're going to be doing this for the rest of your life. It's an invitation to really participate and paddle, pick up the oar, and let's paddle through the river of shame and sadness and this primal rage. And sometimes it tips over and we fall into the river and we are all consumed with it. And that's the transition here, this idea of being all consumed in it, is that what happens is that we start to think from the point of view of being the hurt child, is that we cannot manage when we're in the river. We cannot manage our own crushing feelings of shame. And this primal rage is so scary, and it legitimately is scary. We are not talking about easy things. I mean, in the truest sense of the boogeyman, in the truest sense of a perpetrator, in the truest sense of a monster, in the truest sense of a tyrant, in the truest sense of oppression, this rage, the amount of fear we have around tapping into this rage is legitimate and is something we all internally notice. And it's the place where people often say when they're entering healing work and entering therapy and they're encouraged to feel their feelings, many people say, oh, I can't feel that because once, that'll let the dam, once I open the dam, I'm going to be flooded and I will die here. I will be so crushed, or it'll take me 8 months before I could at least, pop out of the rushing water of the dam of grief and shame and primal rage. Well, I just have to keep working to hold it all together. And how I'm going to keep working to hold it all together is I just need to keep reinforcing, endorsing this kind of false self persona. And you realize if you're trying to be hear this one's so important. If you're trying to reinforce being the false self persona in relationship, you're not really in relationship because you're not there. I mean, we do our best, but do you hear how obvious that is? If you are overly identified with your false self persona, but yet you're on dating websites, you're dating people, you're in a relationship, and you're trying to be in relationship by channeling your experience and showing up through your false self persona, you know what? You're not really there. You're not really in relationship. You're still manufacturing your experience. And that's why we always feel like, well, not always, but many of us feel like, well, we're our experience is once removed. It's like living life like you're in a bubble, or living life like you're watching a movie. You're not really in the movie. because you're channeling things through your false self persona. So if we have this primal rage, we have these impossible feelings, we've buried them, we've tried to live your life, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and just try to, move on. And then something happens in life and we get crushed and we bump up against this sense of utter abandonment and pure isolation. That's what we're safeguarding ourselves against. Utter abandonment and pure isolation. I can't feel those feelings. And especially we can't feel those feelings when we assume we're going to enter it through our child psychology, through our immature perspective, and that we don't even have any resources. And this is how many of us then very quickly implode into a childlike state, and we can't even maneuver, because in those moments we're 8 years old. If I move in the direction of trying to even consciously hold my utter abandonment and pure isolation, I automatically enter that through my child self. And that is just frightening. And some of us live through that view. Our view of the world then becomes, don't feel that, and let's just try to be good. Don't feel the bad feelings, just feel the good feelings. Don't let in the shame, because that's bad. We just have to, move. Oh, there's this drumbeat, there's this real survival mechanism that says, let's not feel that. But from the point of view, as we all know, when many of us are activated in suffering, when we are not in our higher self, when we're not tapped into our wisdom self, and we're really operating from a lower level of consciousness because we're suffering, because life is hard. And we start to view the world simplistically as just good or bad. This is where black and white thinking comes from. And what has happened in this dynamic, and this is really important in this moment, the narcissistic wound is the wound of the development of the self. And we have created and adopted this point of view that these shame feelings are so bad that it links to concluding that we are bad. And we link the belief that we're bad, this core shame, to this primal rage. And so therefore I cannot feel, do you hear this? This is how it gets set up. We cannot feel the primal rage or address the shame, because the way to get there, the way this psychological dynamic has been set up, is that we have to walk through the door, what we believe we enter. The only way to enter it is we have to believe we're the bad person. To feel the shame, I must to move into the place where I believe I'm fundamentally flawed as a human being, and to feel the primal rage of having been taught that, it means I'm the bad person. I cannot feel these feelings. I can't be the bad one. And I must be bad. If I have these feelings, then there must be something wrong with me. If you notice, I keep repeating this point, and because there's a crossover here, there's a link. The idea is that if we disown this in ourselves, we are going to see it in the world around us. Let me repeat that. This is so important. If we disown our own delusional assumption that we are bad at the core, and we will do everything in our power to develop a false self-persona to protect ourselves from ever feeling those difficult feelings, yet we still are living with this belief and this feeling that, deep down, I might be the bad one, or I am bad, I therefore have to cover it up and be the good one. We are going to project this out into the world. And we're going to look for other people who are going to be the ones who are bad. We will have a repulsion, aversion, we have a revulsion to feeling those feelings. I don't want to be that, because then I would be different. And so we protect this false self-image of the good person. And some of us call this the empath. Some of us call this the loving caretaker. Some of us call this the codependent. Some of us can call this, the big-hearted person who just puts everybody else's needs first and really wants to help out. But we are so invested in making sure we are the good person because we can't feel the shame feelings that falsely, delusionally tell us that we're the bad person. And because we haven't made peace with those really difficult feelings of this black and white thinking of good and bad, we then project that out onto the world, and we're going to look for other people who are the ones who are bad. Those people. And you see the connection then, how this is so super ripe and super easy then to say, I wonder where there's a group of people where we could all collectively judge them and give them a hard time and make them the source of all of our primal rage, and make them the source of illuminating the shame and our false self-persona that we're already living with. And the fact that the false self-persona cracked and we got crushed in our own grief, and now we're left with this complete aftermath of extreme pain of not knowing who we are. We want to point to the person who was responsible and participated in the process, and we need to find the bad people who did this to us. And usually our mind goes to our partner, because we can't take any responsibility for our own feelings, because to take responsibility for those feelings will push us deeper into the thing we're trying to avoid. Oh my, this is a riddle, isn't it? Do you see how complex this is? And so then we project this onto others to keep continuously proving, hey, we're the good ones and they're the bad ones. And I'm referring to, this is not, complex, that this particular point is easily captured in this idea of dualistic mind, dualistic thinking, good, bad, black and white thinking. And it's all around us. This is how, remember earlier I said we're in a very immature culture. We are not very advanced around the world globally. We are not leading from a strong foundational wisdom tradition or grounded in, mature wisdom mind. We're very immature, wounded. We could make the argument that the world is collectively in trauma mind. We are all operating from trauma mind. And this creates a lack of resource, and we see things in this black and white thinking. And dualistic black and white thinking coming from trauma mind means somebody is good and somebody's bad. It means somebody is chosen and somebody's unchosen. You can't have a chosen without the unchosen. And if you can see this rampant, this very immature approach to life, and thinking that everything is somehow outside of ourselves, and it's all because of those other people. Tap into politics, any type of politics, where, whatever side you're on the good side, and whoever's not on your side, obviously they're on the wrong side and they're bad. You're good and they're bad. And this is the source of war. This is the source of genocide. This is the source of oppression. And it's a lot of this projecting from this immature, wounded place that none of us know who we are. And it is very easy to make the argument culturally that we all are suffering from this huge, extreme, enormous narcissistic wound, the collective narcissistic wound, the wound of the development of the self. We are all walking around blind, not knowing who we are, and then we get angry at other people because we don't know who we are. And it's their fault. Now I have to repeat a bit of the disclaimer that I set up earlier, just in case I'm pushing your buttons and you're noticing some, challenging feelings around this. When I say earlier, you might adopt, an approach of needing to reinforce that you're a good person, and that's how you might overly identify with being the caretaker, and you have a big heart, you present as a big-hearted person who really wants to help people. I am not challenging that. This is how this stuff is so complex and hard to talk about, because it's not denying that that is still coming from an altruistic place. There's still some fundamental goodness in the fact that you're a nice person. That's great. But we're not using black and white thinking and saying, well, that, we're concluding that actually it's all fake and you're not a nice person. Well, the part that is fake is the over-identification that you're using that to substitute knowing who you are. That you are in relationship to that solidified identity, that false self-identity of needing to be the nice, caretaker, helpful person, and you do it to ignore actually knowing who you are. And that in and of itself has a self-absorption quality. It has an agenda quality. It has a very subtle manipulative quality. And this is how people are so dumbfounded and so confused that they don't understand, well, why didn't he love me? Why doesn't he see what a good, wonderful person I am? Because even though, yes, legitimately you're a nice person and all the things you're doing are still nice, but you're still not there. You're actually a fake person. And I have to join you in this moment because I'm not, I'm in a glass house and I'm not throwing any stones. I'm a fake person. We are all fake people. That is the narcissistic wound. And when you start tapping into online communities that want to talk about narcissistic abuse and people who are untrained and people who they're doing their best, they're trying to make sense of this material. I mean, just me making this recording now for this video for you to listen to, it is very challenging to map out this dynamic. And so understandably that it makes sense the online communities are going to at times fall short in really understanding what's going on. But we're really at the core all suffering from the same thing. And so to get on the bandwagon, to beat the drumbeat, to say, let's call out this one group of people and let's tag them with everything that we want to disown within ourselves, and let's direct our primal rage at this group of people, and now let's identify them as being broken human people who have personality disorders, who are failing as human beings. We are channeling our own rage, our primal rage, our toxic shame, and we're channeling it onto these other people who very legitimately might be nasty assholes. Nobody's challenging that. I mean, they still, yep, they're still manipulative. Yep, they still crushed your dreams. Yep, they still took advantage of you. Yep, they stole your credit card and, ruined your financial situation. We know that we're not just arguing that that's true. But that doesn't mean that it gives us permission, or it does not absolve us from doing the real hard, challenging healing work of saying, at the end of going through this chapter of needing to understand how the other people were hurtful and toxic and manipulative and employing abuse dynamics to try to get their needs met, and in a way that it completely, that we are all under the influence of our own unconscious, our own lack of awareness, that we would want to get in relationship with a person who we would identify as being the narcissist or narcissistic. Because it's they present this group of people, you realize that we're talking about ourselves. We might not all get on board with abusing each other. We might all not be nasty, toxic abusers, perpetrators. That's the word that I'm looking for. We all might not be, engaging in the victim-perpetrator dynamic. But, we're all looking in the mirror at each other. And so here we have, for people who fall outside of not really being the narcissist, if we're going back to, the way that a lot of the online communities are talking about it, what this means is we're feeding off of our own fear and our own aggression. And these online communities that are beating the drum of the narcissist, narcissistic abuse, is tapping into a core fear that's already there. And I mean, how incredibly, what a perfect audience if that's your messaging. collect in general. Everything I've said is that we are a group of people who are frightened of our own self-reflection. We are a group of people who are frightened of our own feeling states and dropping into a deep sense of knowing who we are, because we never had proper mirroring of anyone holding our hand to look, to shine the flashlight into who we are with a witness, with an observer. And we're left to do it by ourselves. Or we had someone who they're mirroring back to us of who we are. The mirror was cracked. And that what the image, the messaging that we're getting and what we're learning about ourselves is a kind of false messaging that says, well, gosh, well, if the mirror is cracked and screwed up and I'm not getting clear messages, I guess that just concludes that I'm screwed up and I don't, I'm not really a good person. So how really amazing, how ripe and perfect that there's this group of people, us, who have this extreme aversion to self-reflection and needing to hide behind the presentation as if we're self-reflective. Do you hear how this is incredibly complex? I mean, this is so confusing at this point. We, in general, don't want to be self-reflective, but we want to present ourselves like we're self-reflective. Do you see? It is so smoke and mirrors. This is trickster energy. This is the power of denial. Do you see how insightful I am? Do you see how I've done all my work? Do you see how I'm conscious? Do you see how, I meditate because, I'm really aware? Do you see how I'm really practicing presence? And I want to, and that even in and of itself, for people who manufacture a persona, a false presentation of who they are, we then also adopt, saying, well, look at how spiritual we are. I'm so evolved. Look at all the therapy I've done. I've really been doing a lot of healing work. And we even then start to use, and it's all folded into the original system. We're still thinking computer terms of like the operating system. We're still using the same operating system of denial and self-delusion. We're still using instead of Windows 10 or whatever the heck Windows is now, instead of using Windows, we're using manufacturer false self programming. And we're even going to, at some point, try to come off like, look at how insightful and aware we are, and look at all this healing work that we've done. And just quick tangent, if you're familiar with what I'm talking about, it gets, we're really talking about what's called spiritual materialism. And there's also the same idea of, healing materialism or personal growth materialism. And it's this whole idea, that we're just feeding this false self persona. Because we got to make sure that we're the evolved one, we're the better one, we're the good one. And in a number of these communities, we're not addressing, well, in fact, you are the good one, but you don't believe it. And you actually have some residual, painful, wounded feelings that come with this river of shame and primal rage that you are working so hard to never have to feel. And it comes out when your relationships fail, or it comes out in attachment distress when there's tension and you're not getting your attachment needs met, and it provokes being ignored, it provokes being rejected, it provokes being abandoned. And so therefore we project this, our own delusion, onto other people. Now let me share an idea with you, which has to do with family systems and family therapy, or anything related to systems theory, is that a system likes the status quo, and the system will always keep trying to return to equilibrium. And we are only as good as the lowest common denominator. If we have a group of people and we're sharing a certain level of intelligence, a certain level of consciousness, a certain level of awareness, just even intellectual understanding, we can't go to the higher levels. We can only collectively stay at the lower level. And This is the result of a group of wounded people who have insecure attachment wounds and who have this narcissistic wound, which is the wound of the development of the self. So we're all getting together and say, hey, do you have a narcissistic wound? Yeah, I have a narcissistic wound. Do you have one? Yeah, I have one too. Let's all get together and let's begin to talk about what's going on here. And we're only going to be as good as the lowest common denominator of our collective knowing. And we have to understand that when we're talking about a big group of people like we have online, there is going to be a limitation on what we can actually really present these ideas and these dynamics. Because if the group of people who have yet to really come into some of these more complex ideas about the core shame and the primal rage that is fueling all of this, and they have yet to really be able to own any or tap into, hey, this is really about me and my rage. This isn't about the narcissist. This isn't about the other person. This isn't about how I was, taken advantage of. This isn't about all the ways that the other person is working really hard to manipulate me and take advantage of me. This provokes my rage. This provokes this profound shame that links to a sense of self that has never fully developed. And when I tap into it, I continually implode into myself. And this other person, the narcissist, keeps reminding me of how impossible these feelings are. And the way I am going to meet it is I'm going to feed it more aggression, and I'm going to direct the aggression at the other person. And if we are in a collective group of people, we're going to start doing this together, and we're going to endorse and support each other in doing this. We're going to create a culture of aggression, and we're going to create a culture of blame, and we're going to create a culture of righteousness. And we're going to create a culture that reinforces, let's make sure we don't actually talk about what's going on. Let's talk about them. Let's keep watching videos that are constantly going to describe what they are doing and how their mind is working and how they're trying to get one over on you. Now, let me repeat, I think this is the third or fourth time I said it. It still means that all that is true. Yes, these people still are trying to get one over on you. And it still means that, hey, well, isn't that intelligent of you that you would want to understand those dynamics and that you would track them and educate yourself to make, hey, let's make sure this doesn't happen again. So there's still incredible amount of goodness and it's necessary to look at the other people. But here's the thing, when insecure attachment, if you have an insecure attachment, that you're very easily, and you don't have a secure sense of self, you're so quick to look to other to define your reality. And so even in our healing work, if we're constantly referencing how the other person is flawed and how they failed us and how they have a personality disorder, we're still channeling our own knowing of ourselves through linking it to how they have failed. And then we're fueling the original core shame, and we're fueling the primal rage. And if anyone points this out, this is what I said earlier, anyone who wants to send me a nasty message or a nasty email or, get angry at me, the way that we protect ourselves from having to, look, in the spirit of the Wizard of Oz, look at the man behind the curtain, or look at our how we're propping up our own false sense of self. The way that we safeguard against having to do that is we direct aggression at other people, and we make sure that we keep returning to the status quo, and the system wants to return to equilibrium. And in this case, this community, what we're talking, the equilibrium is not really to grow beyond these dynamics, but to protect ourselves from having to see them fully. That's why I have had the boundary around this content in the community of people people that come together and we do healing work. And that's why I've been very specific about saying, hey, we're not going to talk about this. We're not really going to go into these dynamics. Because the toxicity of the primal rage and the shame leaks in, and we are not in an online capacity really able to handle the fact that everyone is in a different stage and different chapter of their development and their healing work. And so the way to manage this that I have decided for how I want to present a program of self-directed healing and build a community, and the 190 videos that I've created, is I'm not going to tap into this. I'm not going to invite it, because it is ripe with unconsciousness. And the type of work that we need to do is really, really challenging, and is a little bit much to think, to handle within providing some educational, psychoeducational information and being to have online chats and conversations. I mean, the amount of work that it takes to protect us from this primal rage and core shame we need a really strong boundary. And that is why, very clearly, for 3 years, I have not wanted to court this community or court this group, this content that would invite members of the anti-narcissist community that would still be coming from and leading from their aggression and making sure they needed to prove that the narcissist really are, the demon and evil, and making sure that we all know that we're good and they're bad. And explaining this, as you can tell how complex it is, we're not always at, if you're at a place where you're coming out of narcissistic abuse and you're coming into understanding the dynamics of the wound of the development of the self, you need to do some, everything happens in chapters, so you need to do some healing work first before you're even able to take this on. I mean, this is advanced stuff. This is a certain chapter after you have, if you think in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I mean, it's the same concept as far as your healing needs are concerned. You need a basic foundation. You need to begin to develop and nurture a stronger sense of self before you can come into being able to even, you need a self in order to look at the non-self. You need a self in order to look at the creation of the false self persona. And as I say this, it's also esoteric and conceptual and sounds like a bunch of, double speak, because we're talking about, conceptualizing psychological processes. And we're just trying to make sense, all of this boils down to trying to make sense. How do I live with this suffering? How do I live with this crushing pain of not feeling like I belong in this world? Of not feeling like, someone knows me or many people know me. And to live life day after day feeling like you're invisible, disconnected, abandoned, rejected, neglected, not known, not seen, not affirmed, not valued, that takes its toll. And what happens is that when we connect to a group of people who also feel the same way, we start exaggerating and magnifying our own delusional thinking. And we start exaggerating our own disconnect from reality. And we're reinforcing the thing that we're trying to heal from. And that's why this is a lot of smoke and mirrors. It's very complex, and quite honestly, it's scary, because there are some people who they have really taken, completely swallowed the messaging of the anti-narcissist community, and they're so far gone down that rabbit hole that all they see the world, they only view the world as in the context of extreme danger, of perpetrators who are out to get you, and that the world is toxic. And again, I'm not challenging that. That is still true, but we don't link it to our identity, and we don't link it as the only way that it's not the lens in which we see the world, and it's not the only vehicle from which we operate from. And oftentimes, for those who have really gone down the rabbit hole and get stuck there, it's then that in of itself becomes re-wounding. And this is why it's very dangerous. And I've had, hundreds of email messages and conversations with people who've said, they find it so refreshing that I have very clear boundaries around, we're not going in this direction. We're not going to talk about how, how it's because the narcissist is so screwed up that your life is now, a mess. And again, I think this is now the sixth time I've said it. I'm not denying that it did impact your life. And yes, it did result in feeling life is screwed up. But we're not talking about whether it did or didn't happen. I agree that it happened. We're talking about how we are so prone, for people who don't have a sense of self, we latch on to external experience to define us. We don't know how to define ourselves. So to really put this into perspective, I want to talk about this idea of parallel processes, which means parallel processes are really fascinating. Is that like if you're working in an addiction rehab center, the staff, the therapist, the people who work there, the management start operating from addictive mind. And you start seeing the staff starts thinking like they're addicts. And I don't mean thinking like an addict in the sense to create an intervention to interrupt how the addict thinks. It's that they themselves come under the influence of their own addictive mind. And so here you have a rehab center who the purpose is to help addicts get out of addictive thinking, but now you have the administration and the staff also simultaneously contributing to addictive mind and operating from their own addictive mind. So this is called parallel process. It's the same thing with any kind of extreme states facility, any type of extreme mental illness, and a group of people who are really struggling to have some grounded sense of reality. And you'll find even in the administration and the staff that works there, including the therapist, that they too also are acting, they have some extreme states. And an outsider will come in and go, wow, I really have a hard time discerning who actually are the patients here. And that in some ways the staff seems, like they're behaving in the same way. They seem to collectively make decisions and treat each other from the same state of mind of the people who are in the who are getting treatment at this, for their extreme states of mind. And so this is called parallel process. So I'm applying this idea. So the group of people who come together who want to talk about narcissistic abuse, you're also simultaneously have a parallel process where you're thinking from the place of trauma mind and you're reinforcing it. And, it's the same thing with the community that I work with. I mean, I have an attachment injury. I have attachment trauma. It has taken me 25 years to, and 200 some videos to come into like this real clarity of like, oh, that's what's going on. And simultaneously, like when I'm in my online community, when I'm making videos, when I'm engaging this content, I too am participating in a kind of parallel process where sometimes my approach is codependent. Sometimes my approach is coming from a wounded place. I'm noticing, and in this from a therapy standpoint, a psychotherapy idea, or, this is what's referred to as transference, countertransference. It's all of this back and forth triggers and projections and how we are like engaging in the same kind of, the very thing that we're trying to tackle and heal from and work with, we're also simultaneously reinforcing it by leading in that place. And it takes a lot of work to take time to debrief and to make sure that you have some clarity about, where you're coming from. And in an online community, meaning websites and videos and this anti-narcissist community, there is not enough safety or boundaries built into the container. There's not a container to be able to reflect back and say, heads up, everybody. You just need to make sure that simultaneously, while we bitch, while we're directing aggression at all these quote unquote bad people, we are actually coming from our own trauma mind. We are actually coming from our own narcissism. We are actually coming from our narcissistic wound. Of course, not all the time, but it is simultaneously folded in. And we need to understand that this is true of the particular people who are making videos, of the particular people who are tapping into, promoting this kind of content. And for some of these people, they're actually literally untrained. And it's a very hot topic to talk about. And it's important to question where, what is the intention behind those who are fueling the fear. Because everyone, including me in this moment of why I'm making this video, people are doing this for content marketing and building an online business. People are doing this to build an audience to sell you a product. And it's very thought out, crafted messages to tap into a niche market to say, well, now buy my course, or now buy my book, or now don't you want to sign up and follow me? And I am doing the exact same thing in this moment. I have a membership community. I am in the process of writing a book. I have discovered that this whole idea that you can build a business online, because quite frankly, after years and years of sitting in a chair individually with psychotherapy clients and doing one-on-one individual work, I needed something else to supplement and to move beyond that kind of format, because it is a very, very stressful, intense work. And so I stumbled upon, well, hey, why don't, what's this online marketing thing? But you realize, or please realize, that the people that you're following, the community that you're tapping into, there is a clear agenda to fuel the fear and to tap into the group of people who don't have a strong sense of self in order to get collectively a community so that they can have their own business. And again, I have to repeat, there's no, I'm not in a glass house, there's no stones here. But the reason why that I'm sharing this is that it is very important to understand the intention behind where this messaging is coming from. And I very purposefully, for all these reasons of the fragility of this type of community or the people that it's going to attract, I had a very strong, clear boundary of saying, I don't want to invite that. I don't want to create that additional layer of confusion. I don't want to, potentially feed the same fear-based thinking around someone thinking now Alan has the answer. The whole point of all of this is no one has the answer. That this is about you being able to come into the conscious choice to evolve and to mature and to grow and to finally let your sense of self have some corrective experiences and evolve into being who you never were able to be. Sometimes that will be helpful to go through a chapter of really needing to look at how other people have hurt you, and sometimes it will be necessary to go through a chapter to have a strong boundary to put that on hold and say, I just need to focus on myself. I need to focus on self-directed healing. I need to look at how do we enhance the quality of bonding, and how do we have corrective experiences? How do we enter a meaningful process of grieving that continually keeps reinforcing focus on my own process, not what they're doing, not how they treated me, not what they're not doing, not what they're thinking. We're not focusing on them. We have to come back and say, let's focus on ourselves. This is a very powerful, strong, fundamental approach to addressing attachment injuries and attachment wounds. I hope that all of this is helpful. Here at the end of acknowledging that we're coming to a close, that I very clearly acknowledge, that the work that I'm doing is about creating this community. The point of this video also really clarifies for the community members people who I do engage in regular conversations with about what we're doing in the community I've created called Improve Your Relationships. And also I'm sharing this information because some people listening to this, it is resonating with. Some people, their ears are perking up, and I've already received many, many emails that I know people need this message, and that I have shared this message before in written format and received a lot of positive feedback of saying, oh, how refreshing. Yes, I definitely want, innately know we need to have that boundary around this content, and we need to take a break from the drumbeat of blaming other people and focusing on what's going on with other people and how the nasty narcissists are out to get us. This is the 8th time I'm saying it. It's still legitimate. There are people out there who are out to get us. And for our healing work and for the sake of discovering and strengthening a sense of our own identity, we need to be able to soften that, put that on hold a bit in order to look at some other areas to shore up getting some resources so that we consciously participate in our own maturing and our own growth. If you would like to join us in the community, please do. I would love to have you. It's alanrobarge.com/community. It's an 8-week program that doesn't end. It recycles. Each week is a topic of discussion, a suggested activity, monthly activities, daily prompts. It's a process. It's not a course. It's not sequential. You can join at any time. It's a willingness for you to say you're going to, openly through self-accountability, identify what you want to work on, and then you share it, and you share your self-reflections. And through an online forum or format is that it hopefully really helps create a sense of belonging community. Obviously that won't happen for everybody, but the feedback that I've received for some people, it really has delivered, and it has really provided that necessary encouragement so that we can see how we are evolving and growing. So this is why I have not spoken about narcissistic abuse and narcissism for the last 3 years. And to be honest with you, after this particular video, I anticipate I'm not really going to talk about it for another 3 years for all the reasons I said. I don't value going in that direction. I value the going in the direction of the program that I have mapped out and the book that I'm writing and the community conversations that I'm having with many people right now. And so that's everything. Thank you for listening. I know it was a long video, and if you got this far to the end, good for you that you stuck with it. I hope that it was helpful. More videos to come. Let's keep talking about relationships.